Okay, that's getting started. So you'll see the HackMD document there. Go ahead and add your name to it.
I'm still struggling with this setting. If anyone uses HackMD more than me, it doesn't.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get going anyway. So this is the Open RFC meeting for the NPM command line tool for Wednesday, June 15th, 2022. And we've linked the agenda. So these are discussions. All these discussions and those in issues are covered by the NPM Code of Conduct. So please keep conversations constructive, civil, and be mindful of others when speaking. As is tradition, raise your hand when requesting to comment on a topic or request to comment asynchronously within the chat. NPM team at its own discretion may moderate, mute, and or remove people from the Open RFC call for any reason. So the agenda today, we'll go ahead and I'll introduce myself. My name is Nathan Fritz. I'm on the NPM CLI team. I'll be running the meeting today from a hotel room. So Darcy normally runs these meetings, so excuse our sloppiness today. Luke's helping me out. But let's go ahead and get started. So the first issue is breaking changes in engines support for NPM 9. Luke, did you want to speak to this?
Yep. Also, if the settings for the node stock should be changed now. So if anyone can't get in there, let me know again. But yes, so engine support for NPM 9. Let me do a high-level overview of what I wrote in the issue, and there's already been a few comments in here of us discussing it. But so the high level is NPM has to have an engines field in our package JSON. We want to support something that's wide enough for wider ecosystem compatibility, but narrow enough that we get some nice new node features and ease of development stuff. And so we will be dropping node 12 support, as that's EOL. 14, we were looking at a specific minor patch version of 14 to support. We could go as low as 14.6. That's when a few V8 features landed, like optional chaining, knowledge coalescing, private class methods. But that's one where it's been important for us to be compatible with other tools. I know Node.gyp and NPM 8 differed slightly on the supported version of 12, and that made upgrading difficult. So that's one where we want feedback if there's a version we should support or features that are going to make it difficult if we don't support. And then 16, same thing. We're looking at 16.13. That's when it went into active LTS support. But again, that was just mostly an arbitrary decision made in the past. We want to make sure we're supporting something that gives that balance of development for us, but ease of use. Ease of development for us, but also wider ecosystem compatibility. And then the little bit of a trickier part is we always, the latest major version, we've always done a greater than or equals to for that. And that's proved difficult to support odd numbered versions, which we want to technically support and possibly test in, but we haven't done that in the past, except for the latest one. And so having the greater than or equal sign allows us just to support everything and not worry about adding new versions as step least. But the downside of that is it's technically a breaking change for us in the past to drop support for odd numbered versions. So another part of this proposal is just one support thing that would go in all of our repos, just a note saying like dropping support for an odd numbered version is not a breaking change for us. So that way we don't have to sember major NPM or all of our modules if we do decide to drop support for node 17. And I think that covers the top, the high level proposal. I think most of the comments too. If anyone else has anything that they want to say about this, Gar, I know you had comments about this.
Yeah, Gar has his hand raised. Go ahead.
Oh, yep. Go for it, Gar.
So as we were discussing this, I think the issue we realize is that we are conflating compatibility with support. And Engines is trying to do both, and it shouldn't. And so what we're trying to do through this discussion is decouple those and say Engines is compatibility. And we can have a different support contract that's just a markdown file that explains what we support. And that's what this is trying to think through. Apparently, just doing a single greater than the 14 isn't going to work. Miles has said why in our team chats. He's not here to explain why. That might be an issue. But what we're really trying to do is get something that allows us to iterate in the future without a semver major. So that's what the core of this is.
Wes.
It's so great to hear you say that, because this has come up a bunch. Actually, Owen on the call probably remembers back in the day the package maintenance working group trying to tackle this. And this is a big gap, and it's not only for NPM, it's for the whole ecosystem. We have a spec that we wrote up. So if you want a markdown file, maybe we could encourage you, I can get links, I don't have them handy, to said spec, and we can maybe get some feedback. And if NPM did decide to implement said spec, that would be phenomenal. Yeah, I can drop them in the issue. Darcy was around then as well, so Darcy will have some good feedback. I think sort of there's some problems with it, so it's not perfect. Totally recognize that. But if we could get some movement on it to really, and especially if we can, get a tool like NPM, on maybe not even fully on board, but implementing some small portion of it, that would be, I think, a great step that was never really taken in the past. So yeah, I'll post some links and see where it goes. But again, don't let that block any of this, because I think that's just totally separate. But it would help, give some structure to the what do we support versus what is actually compatible discussion.
Awesome. Well, that sounds pretty conclusive for next steps. Owen?
So just so I understand, I think the distinction is my package could be compatible with this entire range of maybe major versions of Node, but I'm only supporting maybe like the last semver major. Is that kind of the needle that's being threaded here? It's like, yeah, it'll work, but if you open up a bug that says doesn't work on Node 12 and I support only 14 and above, that's kind of the way to split the difference. Cool. Thanks.
Yes. And this is also, NPM doesn't traditionally have like a support contract. We don't have an SLA. And so this is something we just kind of need to define in the first place. Yeah,
because there's some libraries that could still work from like Node version 1, right? But obviously someone might not want to go through the trouble to fix a bug from it.
If you look in libcli, we kind of are already trying to thread this needle and doing it absolutely the worst way possible, and that we've got a hard-coded floor that we know below that it won't work. And then we look to Engines to warn you, hey, this might not work. So we're treating Engines as support and then treating this hard-coded in the way that Engines should be. So
do you think that perception exists? I mean, obviously within some of these circles, do we think that perception exists in the wider community as well? Or do you think it'll be kind of like an easy way to communicate the nuance there?
I think when Node 0.6 came out and I was asking questions about Engines, they were these same questions and I've not seen anyone answer them. So I don't think there is, everyone just brings a bunch of assumptions to the table, and I don't think there is any consensus in the community about what those mean. Because there's not been any standards. There's not been any way of people separating this concept of support versus compatibility.
Mhm. And you think that'll be kind of like, I assume it'll come in through the documentation then, if that support thing lands in whatever form.
Yeah, hopefully. Like I said, right now, NPM will refuse to run if you're under like 12 dot whatever, whatever features we're using there. And then if the engines mismatch, it'll warn you that's like, hey, this might not work. So we are already kind of confusing those. And I don't know what it will ultimately look like in the CLI once we say the engines are our compatibility matrix, and then support is this other new thing. Obviously, NPM will probably still need to somehow report that, hey, this is unsupported. But it needs to use engines for compatibility. That's what we're driving at here.
Cool.
Luke?
Yeah, I had one other question to raise about this. I know it's my proposal, but does anyone have more information about, so we would, but do other tools treat engines differently? For some reason, I had this in my mind that Yarn or old previous versions of Yarn were stricter by default and failed in some cases. And this information is coming from, I released Semver a few months ago and accidentally or inadvertently dropped support for like Node 13. And with 190 million downloads a week, it was raised an issue of why was this a breaking change in a patch. So I reverted it and fixed the engines and republished, but there was comments on the issue saying this broke my production deploy. And so that NPM itself wouldn't do that. And you know, this gets into a lot of other related issues of you know, running production deploys on Node 13. But I don't want to make this assumption, or at least have a conversation with other tools that are making similar assumptions, and hopefully we can align there. But if no one has more information, I can just make an action item for that and follow up.
Sounds good. Let's move
And Evan,
on.
I see what you wrote in the chat too, so I appreciate that, and I can I'll check that out.
Cool. Let's move on to the add query command pull request. So this is quite a doozy. And we've been working on query RFC for quite a while. Darcy and Roy have been working closely on that. Roy has submitted a pretty big pull request to add this feature. Well, I say it's big in impact more than it is in size, because it uses essentially CSS selector parser to create the AST and then run the queries against your dependency graph locally. So I was, can anybody speak more to this? I know that Roy is turned in his notice and is no longer on the team. So the team is taking over getting this across the finish line. Is there anything that stands out to anybody about this? I think it's a great starting point for us to move forward. Okay, other than rah, this is exciting. We will move on to the next item. This is Evan's proposed backward compatible improvements to compression. Go ahead and give us a summary, Evan.
Sure. So basically, there is a way to reduce tarball size by roughly 5% in my testing. I didn't test every package. And it uses a different tool than gzip. It uses Zopfli, but it produces gzip compatible tarballs. As far as I can tell, it's just something that we could drop in and reduce the file size by a bit. The only wrinkle is, how do you actually run this compressor tool? Because it is written in C. The obvious thing to me would be WebAssembly, and there are a few ports of this compressor to WebAssembly, but you know, what does WebAssembly look like in the CLI is not a question I'm ready to answer. In the previous meeting that this was discussed, could Zoply be rolled into Node Core, in which case it would be very easy to do. So I think, how do we run Zoply, and is the big question here. Is that summary helpful? I feel like I'm new to these, so stop me if that's not helpful.
No, that's great. I'm going to go ahead and raise my hand for myself here. I don't think anybody else has raised their hand. Oh, Gar did. Go ahead, Gar.
You got it first there, Fritzy. Go for it.
So I've got a concern about adding, WebAssembly dependencies to npm. Another approach to this could be linking to a custom compressor tool, rather than, so basically overriding our internal use of gzip in those cases. It would be interesting to articulate like who benefits from a 5% improvement. It would also be interesting to find out like what is the increased CPU time for that kind of operation. Obviously, it's doing more work to make a better compression. So maybe it's faster, maybe it's slower, but it would be good to kind of get some real world numbers there and really understand, who benefits from this, and like, is this something that like package registries primarily benefit from? Is this a bandwidth consideration? Is this just scratching an itch that says, hey, it would be nice to be more efficient? So those are my thoughts. Gar, go ahead.
My comments are in the same line. I would love to make decisions like this from data rather than just, you look at you see 5% smaller and you're like, that sounds good, but like Fritzy said, is it necessary? In the last few months, we've been making some pretty substantial improvements to npm speed and not really making a lot of waves about it, and literally no one's noticed. So I really am starting to question heavily suggestions for performance increases that don't come from some kind of data backing up that it's needed. Now it's just, a lot of what Fritzy said there, just like, is this needed? Or is this just, you look at 5% increase and you say, well, that's obviously better. Well, is it? I think if this compression lib landed in JavaScript itself, it would be an easier decision to make, because historically, we're okay with taking longer to build something than to install it, because that's when you want the CPU time, because that's only happening once versus the install. Outside of that, I don't see WebAssembly ever getting into the CLI, and I don't know that a pure JavaScript implementation is a good idea either.
Okay. Evan, you had your hands raised.
Yeah, so I took some notes. So first thing, I'm not particularly attached to this proposal. I think it's worth considering, which thank you everybody for doing. I'm not, if we decide this is not a good idea, I'm not going to stamp my feet about it. In terms of who wins and who loses and kind of the data question, I think that from what I can tell, the decompression is indistinguishable to me, although I have no data to support that. The compression is somewhat noticeably slower. The whole point of Zoply, to my understanding, is that it's sort of like gzip-10. So it takes longer to compress, but it's the ultimate tarball is smaller. I have a little bit of data to show, like on a few packages, how much smaller it is, and you can test it with your own packages if you want. I built a little proof of concept that I can send out a link to, where you just like upload a tarball and it'll tell you how long it takes to compress with Zoply in your browser, which is different from Node, using WebAssembly implementation. And then in terms of like how it actually runs, I think a pure JavaScript solution is scary as well. I think a WASM solution, I think y'all are the people to make the decision about whether that is something you're comfortable with in the CLI. As you say, like if it were vendored into Node in some way, then that would be great. Nathan X, another good question, which is how is Zoply licensed? I can open the repo and answer that question, but I don't have that off the top of my head. So I think, to me, it feels like this entire thing hinges on, well, two things. One, is this worth doing at all? And two, if it is worth doing, how painful will it be to include Zoply? And will it be so painful, license or otherwise, that we don't want to do it? And I don't feel that I have great answers to those questions, I think. But does that sort of respond to other people? I think Gar had his hand up first.
Just tangential to this, so talking of problems we do want to solve, we do have bugs out there with the existing zlib implementation that the integrities are not the same across every architecture out there. And we've kind of gotten pretty close by changing the compression level, and you'd have to search old issues, but there is an existing issue where that integrity is not the same across every platform, which normally isn't a problem because it's one platform uploading it. The integrity is what it is, but it would be nice and it would solve other people's actual problems if that generated tarball was identical across all platforms. If Zoply solves that problem and it ends up in Node, it's a way easier sell, in my opinion, because it solves a real bug that we have. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. I don't know if that's true or not. It's worth looking into, but it's just another aspect to this that's worth mentioning.
Wes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, I totally agree. 5% sounds awesome. I think for most installs, it's going to be a lot less than 5% of a actual like user land perf increase, right? Because we got lots of caches, which are really nice. And a lot of people are installing the same packages over and over, which is really nice for making sure that cache is effective. Where I see the biggest impact is just literally on the registry storage costs, right? Because 5% on the registry storage costs could actually be meaningful to the NPM and GitHub folks, which they could do behind the scenes, right? And test to see if that's actually valuable to them, without even having an RFC or changing anything on the client. I wonder if maybe that's something the NPM folks would be interested in taking to the registry folks and just say like, hey, if we were able to get something in the CLI that would, meaningfully improve your storage costs, would you partner with us to make that happen and make sure that it's tested and well, done? Like something like that might make it a lot more likely to land. Because this is probably, as much as even if it is gzip compatible, like there's a lot that goes into what people actually rely on in the breadth of the registry consumers, right? So like somebody's going to have to go out and do the due diligence to make sure that that's like actually viable and not going to break a ton of people and have to get rolled back and yada, yada, yada. And I feel like having some partnership there with like the actual like registry team, and because they're the ones who I think would be able to sell it. Like, you know what I mean? Like if you're talking like, somebody's got to go to, your GitHub managers and say like, hey, we're going to do some work on this. Something that cuts costs on the registry side seems like a lot easier sell, unless it was going to land fully in user land, which maybe, Evan, you're maybe interested in actually doing some of the implementation, which might also be, another way that it would get obviously done. But, I just feel like, we gotta, oftentimes I've seen these things, you need to align the incentives before any meaningful work is going to get done. And to me, the incentives are like the registry folks could cut 5% of their S3 costs. That's probably some, multi-zero trailing number, right? Like, which I think could be, a meaningful way to approach the topic, but unfortunately is not really the scope of the RFC call. So, and then I just want to end on a question. do you know, would this require both, like S in the chat, but I don't think I addressed both publish and install time changes? Like, so if we did the publish step first, which would make these available, then really there's no, as long as they are in fact fully compatible at install time, then it sounds like there's not really much downside to landing like maybe a experimental, swap into it. Maybe it is a WASM, whatever, but it's strictly experimental. See if it actually pans out to be beneficial, and work. Maybe if you could get some like testers to adopt it or something on the publish side, then we wouldn't have to go through all the work to do the consumer side, which is the one that's really impactful to users, right? Because install time perf is the one that I think Fritzy mentioned is let's look at some stats, like, or maybe it was Gar, I can't remember, but like those stats are the ones that matter. The publish time, if it takes 10%, 20, 30% longer to make the tarball, I don't think anybody even notices how long it takes to make the tarball in the first place, because it's something you do so infrequently, and you're really just relying on the authentication and the upload time there, that like a very small change there wouldn't really matter. And that would at least give you some confidence in the fact that it will work in general. So those just some, I said I'd end on a question, that I ended on a statement. I'm sorry. The question still stands. Did you see it being decoupleable so that you could do just the publish time and the install time separately?
So it sounds like we've got some pretty clear questions to answer. Luke, you had your hand up. Did you mean to withdraw that?
Kind of. Evan, do you still have your hand up? Did you? I was going to wait until everyone had said something. It overlapped a lot with what Wes was saying.
Okay. Well, let's
answer those questions now. But sorry, go ahead.
Let's wrap this up and move on to the next issue. So Luke and Evan, you guys can go, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I'll go. To overlap what Wes was saying was my only. I agree with all the concerns of as someone who would possibly be maintaining this stuff, but I also consider myself, for better or worse, to be a bit of a performance romantic, is what I call it, where I see a 5% decrease in CPU time on installs, and I imagine what that means for GitHub Actions or CI providers as a whole across the industry. But I agree that this needs to be backed up with numbers to make any substantial decision. But I am in favor of looking for some solution forward.
Okay, Evan.
I'll try to answer some of the questions really quick that I saw, and then I'll just ask one question about send me action items to do beyond comparing install time perf, if there are other things. So can it be done publish or install, whatever? It's just at publish time. Installation doesn't need to change. Nobody needs to upgrade their CLI or anything. What's it licensed under? It's Apache 2. I agree also that we would need to verify that this is viable and won't break people. And so we may want to do an experimental rollout of this if we were to do it at all. If it helps, I've posted a couple of small packages this way by recompressing them myself. And after thousands of downloads, which is not millions of downloads, no user reports. And then a question about integrities. To me, it seems like because integrities are computed with the gzipped tarball and not the unzipped tarball or some other deterministic artifact that is independent of the compression, the registry / the system, I don't know who exactly, is a bit locked in. I guess it's the CLI, is a bit locked in to gzipped, like this exact package format. And so my proposal is backwards compatible, but in theory, you could imagine even better compression that would create a different SHA-SUM in this case, but would be ultimately the same package. And that could also sidestep that integrities aren't the same bug that I think Gar brought up a few minutes ago. It sounds like what I will do is try to get some better numbers on install time perf and come back to this. And please send me a message if there's anything else to look at. Otherwise, I will stop talking.
Cool. So yeah, you might look at the notes Luke's been taking in the HackMD document, and then yeah, it looks like more research needs to be done. All right, let's move on to the next item, which is called only registry tarballs. Can anyone here speak to this item?
Yeah, I'm here. So I don't have an update on it. A lot of excitement around OpenJS World last week. So, but for anybody unfamiliar, just to help catch you up to speed, although this has evolved a little bit slightly in the comments, the initial heart of the matter was effectively to add some sort of checks to npm specific command to be determined that would effectively let you know if a package you were installing did not come from a registry. So specifically, the inciting use case was GitHub URLs. So I know there's like some exceptions, but effectively it's just, hey, if this doesn't come from registry, you know, public or otherwise, it's using kind of any other supported format, and it'll still be fine. But the initial thought is there's some sort of, you know, at least a warning similar to, you know, like an npm audit, but with additional tweaks to let you fail. So, you know, you could have this kind of feedback right in your CI. So it's evolved a little bit as to like where it'll finally land, whether it's an install or an audit. It seems like we'll likely move this into audit because install kind of builds off of that anyway. And then potentially it could expand maybe through the query command to kind of give you more checks and balances through audit. But yeah, that's kind of the TLDR. And so basically what's outstanding at this point is I just need to update the RFC to reflect those comments about putting it behind npm audit instead of npm install. And I think then there's probably a follow-up RFC to explore, you know, how much, where you could take this either in the world of npm query or just exposing more items to those set of checks and balances. But for right now, this is really just how do we introduce this, and the initial focus is specifically on those non-registry specifiers. So it's a gateway, but the first step is specifically kind of like targeting those GitHub type URLs. Anyway, that's it.
Thanks, Owen. Wes?
Yeah, big fan of this idea. Also have written a demo of a tool that is, one of the things I implemented was specifically detecting Git dependencies and complaining about them. I think this is great. And I think that audit is a great place for this. I'm wondering, I feel like, wasn't there another topic brought up even last week? Some folks were talking about it at the Collab Summit presentation. That it was also a new audit command. Like, I feel like there's like a few moving things here where there's like some people want some audit licenses. I think that's Tierney's thing. I think there's like maybe 4 or 5. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to do like what are all of the things that could sit behind audit, and then find the, you know, the North Star feature that would enable all of them, instead of like having them all be sort of these, you know, one-off commands that do effectively the same thing, right? It's query, right? But it's query and then, you know, report on it in some way, warning or error, right? So like maybe there's some super RFC that kind of composites the features from these 3 or 4 different ones together into a way that we could, you know, make that, because look, I'm as a user, like if I put myself in I'm in my own shoes, but in my user shoes of like the people who use the libraries I write, I've had these conversations. They don't even run audit on a regular basis. Getting them to run audit and audit dependent, well, whatever the dependency types and audit licenses and audit, whatever else new thing we get in the future, like they don't even run audit regularly, and they don't deal with the audit results in a reasonable way anyway. So like if we're going to start adding these, we need to be really critical about what value we're adding to the end user's experience. If we're now going to say like, well, you should really be running, audit and audit dependency types and audit licenses, like, and then like figure out what is the cross of the three that is the applicable update you want to do, like, not a great user experience, right? So I'm wondering, like, maybe there's an opportunity for us to like compile this list of the ones that are all like, these are new audit features, and then like try to boil it down to something that could be, a foundation for all of them to build on top of, that will be a user experience that makes sense. Like maybe audit has flags, not some, that's spitballing. I don't want a solution, but I just want to point out that like there's these things that all really are the same thing, and the user experience of running them as separate commands is like less than ideal, I think.
Thanks, Wes. So I'll go next since my hand was raised next. I think like, as if query can do everything that audit does, or at least most of it, maybe it doesn't deal with the audit reports, but we can essentially, re-implement audit to just be a list of queries and warning levels and resulting messages, and then the user can just flag which ones they want to run, and the user could even extend a query list, right? They could add queries to their own audit. There's again, that's solutioning, but that seems like it might be an interesting RFC to refactor audit to be extensible with queries going forward, and then allowing users to turn on and off which things are happening in audit, right? So that's cool. I like that. Owen.
Thanks. Yeah, no, those are all great ideas, Wes. I think maybe getting my memory banks booted up back on this. I think then, I'm not sure if maybe this is more for someone who's familiar with query. If we're gonna, so I can't remember if the idea was just do npm audit this special flag, and then once query lands, do all the things that Wes is talking about through query. But I don't know if npm query is its own top level command. So I guess the question is, do we just wait for npm query and then support all these? I linked to it in the chat, some of those ideas like engines, signatures, licenses. So I guess the question is there a we want to just get it in for audit just for the registry URLs and then implement everything through query and whatever permutation that comes out to, or just should I update the RFC to be like, this depends on query, and then through query, like, I'm not sure how query would interface with audit or the other things. So I'm a little unclear on that. So
yeah, I think we maybe don't need to worry about implementation so much, and just move forward with the feature itself. I think Luke, you were next.
Yeah, I do have an answer to that question. I think the way, I mean, I know we don't want to get into implementation, but the way I see this is that we can go ahead with this RFC and also with what Wes was saying of like a higher level, just other audit checks that we want to run and how that looks. But I think everything can be implemented separately, but with, a shared understanding of how we want this stuff to work. And then query is only an abstraction layer on top of this, in that it gives a new way to send packages to an audit command. So you're still like, currently you could run it, -- production and only audit your production dependencies, but query will just open that up to be any subset of your packages that can be queried. So that's to answer that question. And then I think to what Wes was saying, I wanted to add that I agree. We actually talked about this at OpenJS, and I do think that there's maybe another RFC that I'd be willing to write of this higher level audit, and how it, I was also looking at this through the lens of ESLint, how ESLint has recommended rules, but then other rules you can run that they ship alongside of it. And I think that's another RFC that I'd be willing to write in the future.
Wes?
Yeah, so the way I sort of see this, envision like the end state is, I think a combo of ESLint, where the rules don't take quite as much deep internal knowledge to write, aka a query would be great. A query, CSS query syntax could be like a great interface there to let people write rules. And then have those rules have, effectively a warning or configuration is, again, we chatted, Luke, about the lint approach. And I really think it resonates with what we want to do here, right? It's like some security errors are massively, important, break the build. Some are things that we just want to get updated next time you do whatever your dependency update cycle is. Some are, probably a lot of them are auto fixable. Like all of these things are things we already have user experiences for that people understand and get, because they do it through lint. And then ignoring, right? Like we've talked a lot about ignoring security updates when you're not applicable. And there's like been no movement on it. But like right now, if we were to solve it if we were to solve the general problem in a linting style, we would just have ignore, like we'd be able to configure the rule so that it ignores certain CVEs, right? Like that to me is like a foundation that already builds on user experiences that people understand, and also solves a huge swath of existing problems. And especially now that query is there, and I was just opening and sort of browsing the implementation, I do think like the demo that I had built, which did this with like sort of a complicated ESLint style thing, is probably just made 100 times more approachable just by making them NPM queries and then running the little, like, whatever the thing is called. I found the file and now I lost it, but whatever we built for like matching the dependencies against the query, like, that would probably work for like the most important 85-90% of the rules we would want, people to audit against. So to me, that seems like a really natural fit for like moving forward, building on, what's there.
Cool. Owen, let's take us home.
Cool. Yeah, so for my own takeaway in terms of updating the RFC, so it seems like the concrete thing is to just get this one particular flag into audit, and then anything that's this ESLint NPM query could be mentioned, but would be its own RFC. So this is just kind of like the stepping stone, and some other RFC can do the rest of the heavy lifting. Okay, cool. That helps a lot. So yeah, I should be able to make those updates so we can review that for next time. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Let's hit the next item. Registry scoped key file, cert file, credential options. I hadn't had a chance to read through this yet. Can anyone speak to it that's here?
Yeah, I can. Or Michael, I don't know if you want to go, but we talked about it a couple weeks ago. I think most of us were here, and actually Wes is familiar with it because I work with him. So, but yeah, the gist of it is just improving the UX and the security around client certificates and keys when it comes to NPM config. So having the ability to scope them to a specific registry and also have the options be the paths to those files and not the contents themselves. So RFC goes into more detail. And when we talked about it a couple weeks ago, yeah, the general consensus was, yeah, this is something that should have been in there from the beginning. So I don't think there was a whole lot in the way of open questions, but I just wanted to see if anyone had any other comments or things we should tweak with RFC. Yeah, open up to y'all.
Gar.
Yeah, it was my understanding we were going to leave it for one more cycle just in case, but other than that, it's good to go. And you could start working on the implementation, please.
Awesome.
And
yeah, we'll do.
if you need any help.
All right. Sounds good. Let's move on. We can all wave at Wes's kid. And let's see. The next is initiative V8. So it's about lowering friction from people upgrading through V8, and reducing the maintenance burden. Can anyone speak to this?
I can't. I also want to. I had juggled around the notes document, Fritzy, which I realize is a bad idea since it's not the source of truth in the issue. But I had moved up the RFC for parent package JSON because Wes and I had spoke about that at OpenJS, and it seemed more timely than our other major version initiatives. But if that's not correct, we can go back to something else.
No, let's. So what's the item you want to go over?
Wes, do you want to speak to this? I'm pulling it up now. We had discussed it, and I added the agenda label to it because it's an Open RFC from June of 2020 with a bunch of comments on it, but it looks like action items had fallen off the radar for this.
Yeah, so basically, I posted to ask Christian if they minded if I took it over. Haven't heard back yet. My take on this was most people agreed on the general idea because it solves some pretty clear user experience problems that other folks in certain spaces solve through less than ideal things right now. So, like for example, React's the Create React app project uses like scripts that they insert. If we had a parent and they could control that remotely, then each app. Can you be quiet a little bit, because I don't know if people can hear over your singing. So here, can you go run to mama? Okay. So anyway, so it solves a sort of a host of problems across, different user experiences. We have some at Netflix, which is why when I noticed that it didn't make the plans, and I've been a little bit MIA on these calls, I was like, oh, that was one that I was really hoping would continue moving forward, because we have a bunch of these, what we call managed platforms. Administering them centrally is rather difficult. But also, I think back when we were talking about this, folks like Jordan, were mentioning like these prolific module authors, prolific library authors have these, administrative duties that they have to do across hundreds of libraries, and doing that can be often very difficult. And if there was a mechanism to centrally manage those certain parts of what are in each of these packages, it would make those sorts of things much, much easier. So this was a sort of an outcome of that discussion. And honestly, I think probably it just needed a driver, and maybe Christian was not available. I don't really remember following up toward the end of that what dropped it, but I don't think it was anybody saying this is a bad idea, we don't want to do it. So my hope is to just pick it up and move forward. I think since it hasn't been commented on in a really long time, I think it probably needs maybe to be either refreshed PR or something that we can get, or maybe we just need the folks who are now on the NPM team who maybe weren't at the time to take a look over it and see if there's any glaring concerns that that you all have that I could maybe address and update in the PR, or whatever all you all think is maybe the better next steps. There, I'm open for lots of input. So.
Yeah, I think this is just a good call for everyone to get refamiliarize ourselves with this RFC and make sure that we know what the next action items are. So yeah, certainly pick up the mantle, Wes, and we will work on it going forward.
Do we have any precedents for handing off RFCs if folks disappear? I mean, I don't mean disappear. That's not in a bad way, but like, like I didn't want to step on their toes if they wanted to continue. Is it just sort of loosey goosey? Like, I didn't know if there was a process I should follow.
I'd have to ask Darcy. I haven't seen anything like that, unless somebody else has. But I think just the comment is good where you added them, and if they respond, great, and if they don't, let's just keep moving forward.
Cool. I'll give them a little bit more time, and then I'll hopefully revisit it before next week, and maybe then I can talk more about like the details of it and dig a little bit deeper. Thanks.
Sounds good. Let's see. Well, we already went over query a little bit. I think we're probably good for today. The other issues in there that are marked for agenda are all of the initiative efforts for the next couple of major versions, and feel free to look through those, but I'll let Darcy speak to that when he comes back, and share more what's on the roadmap. But yeah, other than that, I think I will end the stream here. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I believe we're planning on doing one next week, so we'll see you then.